Reminder that this board workshop is recorded and it is live streamed on Zoom webinar. There will be no votes taken during this workshop. Let's start with introduction of commissioners and presenters around the table and then the rest of the room. Kelly Miller, Ramsey County Commissioner, District 7.
Mike Garrison, Fletcher, Commissioner, District 3.
Mike Chong, Commissioner, District 6.
Rafael Ortega, Commissioner, District 5.
Tara Devon Singh, Commissioner, District 1.
Rita Moran, Commissioner, District 4.
Lynn Becker, County Manager.
Barry Collins, Deputy County Manager, Economic Growth, Community Investment.
Josh Olson, Director of Community Economic Development.
Pat Chapman, County Assessor.
Brian,
Public Works. David Flag, Private Citizen. Max Hilton.
Karen Francois, Deputy County Manager, Community Services and Supports. Here's from the Report Solution.
Here, Anthony, Deputy County Manager,
Alex, Conservation Operating Officer. Julie Hernandez, Principal Agent and Community. Will Rafael, that.
Is Commissioner McGuire online? Okay, do you want to introduce yourself? Oh, okay. We do have Commissioner McGuire online. So today's workshop builds upon last week's workshop in highlighting Ramsey County's fiscal health. We will hear about how the county can respond to property tax realities through the use of county tools. Our economic development staff will walk through pathways of focus that will catalyze economic growth. I will now hand it off to the presenters to kick off the workshop. I also want to note that if we have questions, we try to hold as much as we can to get through as quick. And if we have to go over a little bit, is that okay with everybody to go over at least like 15 or so minutes? Okay.
All right, thanks, Commissioner. I'm gonna kick us off today. I wanna first of all thank Carrie and Josh and Brian on the team for really helping us get to today. A lot of conversations and planning has led us to today, but the catalyst for the conversation is something you're very, very familiar with already. So I'm gonna have Josh go through here today. Carrie and Josh will be the presenters. I'm just gonna do a quick kickoff. I'm gonna talk just real briefly about the responding to property tax realities, and then they'll go into some of the details around the tools, how we're gonna adapt to the future, and then have some conversations as we bridge into an afternoon conversation around a bold economic development strategy. So some of you have actually already seen this slide. This is actually something we've used with our legislative delegation, and I thought, well, rather than creating something new, let's just kind of have a consistent message as we talk about this publicly with folks. So as you all know, we are facing significant property tax pressures, and Ramsey County is a bit unique, while we also have some things that other government entities like counties are also experiencing. So there's a couple of things happening at the same time. But on the revenue side, we've talked a lot in previous conversations about the amount of tax exempt property that we have in our county. And we've talked about, how to advocate sort of against that as we look at our legislative strategy. We also have the lowest per capita net tax capacity in the 7-county metro area. Talked about that quite a bit as we went through our budget process last year with our biannual budget. You're all very familiar that we have a small, densely populated, fully developed county, which makes, new development extremely more challenging. We don't have a lot of open space where you get to start with, a brand new piece of property with, kind of a blank slate. Most of the time it's complicated. And then, this was the first year in a while that we saw some of these property tax shifts that went from our commercial over to our residential. So those are kind of on the tax side, some of the challenges that we face that are primarily unique to Ramsey County. I will say the cost shifts in terms of the pressures we feel on the expense side are not necessarily unique to Ramsey County, but we are unique in the amount of people we serve and the diversity of our population. So sometimes the impact can be very localized. We're seeing significant cost shifts of underfunded and unfunded mandates. Many of you are very, very familiar. Just to give you a little sense of that, as we look beyond, the federal cost shift of primarily of HR1 is, NACO has told us it's about 1 trillion over the next 10 years to state and local governments. That's gonna depend a little bit on what the state does. When we were at NACO, it was very clear that, the advocacy at the federal level, at least in the short term, isn't gonna be any additional dollars. As we kind of project out just on SNAP and Medicaid beyond 2027, in a kind of a worst case scenario, it could be up to $21 million for Ramsey County. So we're looking at some pretty high numbers as we think through what possible scenarios could be, though those are not already assumed to happen because some things are gonna, affect us from the state level as well. But in addition, the state also has some looming state budget pressures. I know there's been conversations about a surplus this year, but we know the long-term forecast is always a little bit variable. And you all are very familiar with our current tax situation because you made these decisions, but we started at a 9.75 levy as our starting point in 26. And, through a lot of hard work of our staff and also of all of you making diligent decisions, you were able to bring that down to 8.25 for 2026. So for all these reasons, I think they set the foundation to this really critical conversation of today. Some of you have heard the statement of, no one's coming to save us. And so we really do have to, as a county, figure out what are our tools, what do we need to do, and how do we ensure that people can keep homes, stay in homes, be homeowners, businesses can start businesses, continue being a business, and thrive as a business. So all those things lead to, the work that Josh and Carrie will discuss today. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. So last week, we, just as a recap, we invited Urban 3, a consultant firm out of, St. Paul, as well as North Carolina, to come talk to us and bring kind of a different perspective on how to explore data. That analysis was a key component of our ECI plan back in 2020. And we felt like an updated analysis was warranted and needed as a lot of dynamics had shifted and changed since 2020. The county had invested and was deploying new tools in that period of time. And so, we felt like this was the next way to update our analysis and our ECI plan as we look forward to a 2.0 version of it. What that Urban 3 analysis really spoke to was that, land productivity, value, but specifically land productivity contributes to tax base. We do have a complicated property tax system and how things are calculated in comparison to maybe other states and regions around the country as we think about how we as a Ramsey County community is competitive in a global landscape. But that, value is important, but productivity is also important. And you'll start to see a little bit more of that here in the subsequent slides around why that is uniquely Ramsey County's piece. The importance of downtown and those areas that are very tax rich are important both now and will be into the future. And how the abundance of tax exempt land is both our reality, but our opportunity, especially when you peel back one additional layer, which is Ramsey County owns a fair share of those key sites. And then lastly, this is both a Ramsey County as we look forward, but also as we partner with community, that infill development is critical. So not to bring in yet more data, but I want to kind of level this with a little bit of what was discussed last week. And that is around the discussion around availability of land. Availability of land in the economic development circles that I and my staff and Carrie and Ling have often sat in is often a predictor of opportunity and wealth. And so as the smallest county in the state, Ramsey County's options are far from endless. And as you look at comparisons to our other regional partners, for example, Hennepin County is over 3.5 times larger than Ramsey County in land. And that when compiled, our share of the region only represents 5.5%. Our level of work and our work will be different. And so as we look forward to an economic development strategy, this is who we are, and that's okay. What we do next is different, and what tools and resources we bring may look different than even our regional partners who are right next door. So again, this is, yet another peeling back layer by layer, and this is within respect to land use. So over the last several months and weeks, you've heard about tax base and value. This is around just land and land use. And I just want to caveat that, not to confuse you with all these different percentages and numbers. But Ramsey County continues to outshine, or maybe shine differently than our regional counties. And it's reflected in these two particular graphs. The graph on the left demonstrates how many of us describe Ramsey County. We are nearly built out, right? And that is reflective, where our availability of undeveloped land or the possibility of greenfield development, that's often a connection point to agricultural land, is very limited. And in that case, Ramsey County is very clearly on its own island. So when one looks, also combines the abundance of institutional land, and that sometimes is described as land that is primarily religious, governmental, educational, cultural, social, and major healthcare uses, Ramsey County continues, and again, stands out. What Urban 3 showed us last week's presentation is that these data points show up when it comes to land value and land productivity. And if there is an area where Ramsey County could and can and must be laser focused, is improving land productivity. Because every development and every redevelopment opportunity, be it 1 acre or 427 acres in this county, is significant. So as we look at opportunities, and we heard this morning a question, there was a question posed about what is Ramsey County's story, and Greater MSP responded, it's about sites. I'm here to tell you we have an abundance of them, even though the last slide suggests we are limited or we don't have as much as others. Ours are different. I will reflect that, and I'll say that you'll hear it at multiple times today. We have different sites, different attributes, different communities in which these sites are located, but we have an abundance of them. And Ramsey County is certainly central to many of those. So that is the positive news, that Ramsey County is actively working on a number of these opportunities, and that over time, these sites will lower the percentage and the total number of acres of institutional uses. Just these ones listed on here, and the math is a bit fuzzy at times because we're adding more, taking away some. But the 900, yeah,
The taking away some with the opportunity, yes. 525 is now looking, less 70 acres or so, as of
Yesterday,
yeah. So that's really exciting. So go ahead, Josh.
you took away my point. No, it's okay. So the 900, yes, thank you. So the 900 acres that represents about 14% of those 6,200 institutional acres that were listed on the prior slide. These moving these properties into a new state of redevelopment will allow the county to move tax-based needles. And so, yes, we do have the exciting point that we've moved one off of this list. And even before that, we moved 10 acres out of 427 acres at Rice Creek Commons. And so we're actively moving this step by step. And we're going to speak a little bit more today about how we might be able to, in some cases, move faster, move more deliberately, and in other cases, incorporate new and enhanced ways of going about it. So, as I noted earlier, Minnesota has a complicated tax structure, and what Urban 3 showed in the last week's presentation was the direct tie back to land productivity, tax base, as well as property tax generation. It's not a neat straight line. It meanders, it loops, it changes in part. But the simple reality is that Ramsey County's high percentage of institutional land uses and tax exempt parcels is the county's unique attribute and unique challenge. While the data shows areas of concentration, certainly around the Capitol, downtown St. Paul, the abundance of tax exempt property is countywide. As an exercise, we sliced the county a little bit by city and neighborhood, recognizing neighborhoods in the city of St. Paul are equivalent in population and sometimes in area to some of our cities in suburban Ramsey County. And when you begin to do that, you begin to see areas of strength, areas of growth, and areas of opportunity. Our assessor's office recently performed a hypothetical analysis that asked, what if tax exempt parcels had a classification that was more closely mirrored to its use? For example, a government office could be more like a commercial office, just to give a kind of a comparison. What it showed was that 55% of downtown St. Paul's hypothetical tax capacity is located within tax exempt properties. If we, again, concentrated and focused, but if we showed Maplewood's total hypothetical net tax capacity, 16% was found in tax exempt parcels. Those numbers are fascinating on many fronts, but what is compelling is that if downtown, and in some cases Maplewood too, had this hypothetical additions, in the case of downtown as a geography, would be within the top 5 areas of the county in terms of tax capacity. Maplewood, already a very strong contributor, would further increase in those areas. So the point being is that the growth in these areas shows up in multiple places. Again, I would say, we looked at this hypothetical analysis, looked at tax exempt across the entire geography of Ramsey County, and it exists almost in every single corridor, every single community, every single neighborhood. But there were a couple instances where things just show up and they pop a little bit more, representing opportunities where the county, specifically through its assets, could do more, could address, could be part of the answer or begin to be a part of the answer. So as we talked about downtown, and again, not sorry to kind of float between numbers. And so I feel like there's at times if maybe what we should provide you in the coming weeks and months is almost like a cheat sheet of the different numbers to show the differences. But what I will tell you is the general answer to almost all of those, whether the number is 49, 55, 12, 16, it's the same answer across the board, which is we outshine or shine differently, but the same story is the same. It puts us in a different light from other geographies, and these are areas of strength and opportunity. So again, last week, you began to see the importance of downtown to the county. And the Urban 3 analysis demonstrated both the importance there to the whole, but also reinforced that downtowns are important generators, be they in Ramsey County, in Hennepin County, or other communities across the country. They are value-rich contributors. Downtown St. Paul's contribution in the county's tax capacity or within the tax base is declining. And we've seen that over time. Downtown's tax capacity, its contribution or percentage of the county as a whole, is down from its peak in 2018, which represented over 4.69%. In 2025, it's 2.97. What that means is the opportunity to address these trends exists, but that this persistent and downward trend is resulting in a greater burden to other geographies in Ramsey County. The good news on that is there are ample opportunities in downtown. Downtown is the center of the county in many respects, but also the county's facilities, redevelopment assets, and investments in things in infrastructure like transit are at the center of downtown's opportunities. So just to give you a kind of a quick fly through, these are just pinpoints in downtown reflecting where the county has key development sites in yellow, other core county facilities in red, other things that are happening in blue, things that we're connected in, whether it's St. Joe's Hospital's future redevelopment or the arena complex or the importance of a project at Central Station. These things are happening now. And interestingly enough, when you layer on the county's transit lines, both existing and proposed, they intersect a lot with what is happening. So Ramsey County's importance and Ramsey County's being central to things that are happening in downtown shows up both in its assets, its sites, its buildings, but also its other investments in improvements in transit and transportation. Also, just to overlay one additional line, the purple that you see up on your screen are areas that show up in the downtown investment strategy, which the county was a partner to. These are high importance corridors that downtown stakeholders called out. And as you can see, there's a tremendous amount of overlap, both in where the location of our sites are, but also where our investments in future transit or existing transit exist today. So again, to kind of say what I said before, downtown is, center of the county. It's a concentration of so many things, but the county and its assets and redevelopments and investments are central to downtown's future. The county is uniquely positioned to help effectively move downtown forward, be it part of the strategy to help advance its own redevelopment project in River's Edge, by maximizing its potential and protecting its future county investments in that project, to effectively position the unique opportunities in Ramsey County East or 555 Cedar or others sites to achieve a multitude of strategic county goals, or to broadly stimulate growth and vitality in downtown that brings more people to downtown, grows businesses, makes it an attractive place to live, work, do business, and recreate. A multi-pronged approach to action will be necessary. The challenges in front of us are a blend of ones that are uniquely Ramsey County, challenges that come from only the development, challenges that come only when development is redevelopment, right? Things are harder, but also part of shifting market demands. Things like office changes, changing consumer behaviors and preferences and expectations. People are more desiring experiential buying and living and recreating. The need to invest in infrastructure, sometimes because it is, I'll skip over my point. I lost it there for a second. The ability to counter perceptions. And also just that the tools in which we need to help advance projects, develop advanced opportunities, need to be responsive and dynamic so that they meet the local needs here in downtown.
Can you share what these spaces are?
Yeah, so quickly I'll run through the pictures. The picture on the left is an area on 7th Street, right there at Wabasha. It's a building that has long been vacant. In the last 10 years, some things have come in and out. It's just a difficult project that a lot have probably put forward ideas and nothing has really stuck. Downtown infrastructure, a lot of improvements have been made and are continuing to be made in downtown. But that's in part because downtown is there's aging infrastructure, but also the need to update infrastructure to align with the realities of today and desires of folks today, multimodal futures and such. Shepherd Road, this could be a picture anywhere in downtown at certain times of the day, where there's less traffic, there's less activity going on. Central Station is a key site in downtown, a key transit hub. But it comes with many of its challenges over the last several years. And then the last picture on the right is a Landmark Center. This is a brand new project just out the door from here at City Hall and the courthouse. This is a project that just went through a conversion of office to residential. And it is both a great story, but also a story that reflects how difficult conversions of office buildings will be. They're expensive. They may not always be the easiest to do. And so tools that match that reality will be needed moving forward. If you talk to the city staff, you know, this was a difficult one to come forward with. It's a market rate project, and the city had to put forth TIF in a unique way. And so it's just reflective, whether that is the best example. It is a recent example of where, you know, tools being deployed in a different way will be necessary.
Where was that located?
Just kitty corner to down to this building. Yeah, right across the street from Sakura. So the challenges outlined will require more than the county. No surprise there. But in order to navigate and maximize the tailwinds, the county simply won't be able to do this alone. But the county is uniquely positioned to take on an extra and bigger role. In part because the county has assets. The county has tools that, when well aligned with other partners, create new economic growth for the county and downtown in particular. Speaking of tools, over the last 5 years, the county has demonstrated its ability to flex, to adapt, to respond, and to develop plans that are rooted in Ramsey County's values. These plans and tools that come from these plans are the foundation for which we can build a strategy upon. More effectively, operating as a One Ramsey County, the impact of a comprehensive and coordinated strategy will result in deeper impact. Oops. So the data metrics that we've presented to you over the last week and this morning demonstrate that the situation and the need, and that we believe the county has the plans and the tools that means the county can jump the curve and create the moment. What I mean by jump the curve is often a strategic business concept focused on driving innovation and growth, particularly during difficult economic challenges, in order to leapfrog competitors by moving from a mature, sometimes declining, or a stagnant business model to a new high growth one. We believe the moment is now to address the high percentage of tax exempt property in the county, to expedite the real estate project readiness of many of our sites, and jumpstart the next portfolio of underutilized properties, to reinvest in public infrastructure that fosters economic opportunities of those sites and across the county, and contributes to the sustaining and enhancing vitality of this unique and wonderful place, and cultivate new and enhanced partnerships where collectively we will build a much more sustainable and resilient tax base. We believe in these actions and partnerships and opportunities will relieve growing pressures on the property taxes of residents and businesses across the county, but also elevate the public realm or the public's experience that is safe, clean, inviting, and full of activity, and foster new housing and business opportunities within the county.
Okay,
That's the end.
I have questions from Commissioner McMurtry. Is there any other questions? Does anyone else?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have a question too. I'm trying to get my hand up, but this is
Okay,
Mary Jo. I have a question
All
too.
right, Mary Jo,
Yeah.
I will have you go after Commissioner Jean.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for this presentation. I really appreciate just the walkthrough of all the different opportunities that we have within the county. I have questions specifically on that slide right there. When we look at the expediting of real estate project readiness and jumpstarting large portfolio, can you speak to if there are like existing barriers that we need to try to get ahead of to make this work a lot easier for you all to do, like whether it's internally within the county that we need to make adjustments, or even are there outside factors for instance, knowing that for many of these, the city remain, the land use authority for a lot of these different areas. Are there ways that we can start figuring out how to get ahead of these barriers so we can go about expediting and jumpstarting these different ones?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioner McMurtry, and I'll look to both Ling and Carrie to help back me up on this answer too. I think, certainly one part of this, and this goes without saying almost in every single real estate project, funding matters and having the ability of resources matters. So, having flexible funding that is focused on an area or a specific thing absolutely matters. And, we can certainly point to this county's commitment to affordable housing over the last years and its focus. There is an example where we've begun to remove barriers to move the market in different ways. Us continuing to replicate that in other areas is one part of it. So funding for sure. Tools, I think you saw a little bit of this last week. Bringing data into decision-making circles is important. It's not necessarily about persuading our city partners to look at something differently, but allowing them to understand and look through different lenses so that they can make the best decision is absolutely part of it. And so adding, resources, but also resources in the form of like letting them get to answers is really important too. And then I think the other is there's a lot of competing priorities across our entire region. And you heard a little bit of that this morning. There's a lot of projects, a lot of sites. Our story in Ramsey County is unique. And I think sometimes we need to say it more loudly, how important and exciting our different sites are for a myriad of reasons. Yes, the large project that's searching for 200 acres may not be an eligible thing here. We may not have those characteristics, but the number of businesses that follow that 200-acre project may fit really neatly into what we have, whether that is housing, whether that is ancillary or connected industries and projects. And so I think for us, those are the elements that I think are the three barriers at times that we've not missed, but not kind of been more forceful in speaking to.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Commissioner, I will add one thing. Well said, Josh. I think what we've traditionally come to expect is that the development community wants certainty of financing. They want certainty of timing. And so the regulatory aspect, to your point, Commissioner, does matter. The timing it takes to get permits, the timing it takes to get from start to completion. And some of those variables are outside of our control at times. What we can do, however, on these major redevelopment projects is to invest more upfront, to redefine what shovel ready is, to reduce the amount of barriers upfront, so that when they get to the time of taking out the permits, we've done that pre-work for them to help with that certainty of timing and to help with the financing piece as well. And so I think you'll hear more about that this afternoon. But the barriers are still there, but it's controlling what we can control to help shrink that time frame for them.
Absolutely. No, that's really helpful. My other question is on the last bullet point with the cultivating of new and enhanced partnerships. Are we planning to adjust at all kind of our strategy of how we leverage these partnerships? I'm just thinking of, the conversation this morning, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Like, I would imagine that as we're looking at recruiting industries to come here, that to Commissioner Zhang's point, infrastructure and transportation is an important piece of that, of making sure that we have that in place for workers, for people to to come to these different businesses. So when we look at kind of our effort on that front, and whether it be, trying to get additional funding from the state or what have you, are we planning to leverage those partnerships to kind of serve as those additional advocates for us to make sure we can tell the broader story of, all right, we want to see this county, we want to see this region really develop. So state or whatever funding mechanism, we need this resources, and here's a coalition of folks we have around us to kind of speak to the different areas of why this is needed. Like, is that a part of this strategy? Is that something that we've done before? Just want to kind of hear more about that, please.
I mean, I'll speak to the last part of your question, which is, have we done this before? Yes. And I think gives me comfort that we are there to respond effectively and efficiently. And it's easy to go to our experience of the last 5 years around affordable housing, where we have filled a critical need in moving projects forward. We've been deliberate in how we express, the importance of deeply affordable. It's not, that was not a cheap or inexpensive effort, and maybe at sometimes resulted in a few less units in the aggregate because we were focused in making deeper affordability pieces. But I will say that, like, because of our partnership, in that case, the city of St. Paul came alongside of us and they matched our funding. The private partners that we invest in their projects, they came to us and they brought forth different and unique projects to the table. And so I think that is an example of what we mean by this last bullet, which is we haven't necessarily been in the space exactly to speak towards expanding and building tax base. We've gotten there through other means, but I think this is about us beginning to not shift it, but talking about tax base as an important thing to move a lot of needles forward. And so that is, I think, an example of where we've led that cultivation of new partnerships. And so some have come with us very closely. Others got tugged and pulled along, but they're responding. And so, now I think about just what we receive in a CED solicitation is drastically different than what we received 5-6 years ago. Now we're oversubscribed. Now folks are coming with unique opportunities. There's small scale, large scale. It comes across the table. And so I think that's just an example of where, like, I view our partnerships, we're leaning into where we've been, but going to the next place.
Commissioner, I'll just also add that in terms of like enhancing partnerships, I think, there's been a lot of activity, especially as we think about the EDA work that's been happening around the county. Also, organizations like the Downtown Alliance that already has a very robust strategic plan, which we want to come in alignment with. So I think enhancing the partnership is things like, everyone kind of doing their part around a table, and us driving on things and leading on things that we can control, like as Carrie said, but it's not incongruent from what other people are doing. So we just want to make sure if we're driving, like going on a path together, we're not bumping each other and doing all those things, but we're all trying to get there faster together, and I think the recent investments of Securian and also the Bush Foundation into the Downtown Development Corporation with $30 million. I think there's opportunities for leveraging those kind of partnerships. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of people working in this ecosystem. I don't want to appear that it's like we're the only ones that are gonna be doing work here, but I think it's at the table set well for us to now, because of the additional pressures to sort of think more strategically around our property tax, but also like maybe as an organization, we didn't always have all the tools yet. And also we didn't necessarily even have the infrastructure. I mean, I still think back to, it's less than 8 years, maybe, right, Carrie, that she started the county, I started the county. I mean, there was the CED department was how many people?
It wasn't a department.
It wasn't a department, right? So, I mean, when you think about what's happened in housing on the CED side, getting the HRA levy, getting the now the EDA authorities, like we've made monumental strides to be able to now do a bigger swing than anything that was available back in 2018.
But I do want to acknowledge, I think we've only scratched the surface in terms of the partnerships that are possible in terms of driving this vision and this plan that you'll see later today. I think I can't underscore enough that for the last 5-6 years, it has been, we have this huge amount of opportunity. We all acknowledge that all the stakeholders in the economic development space are around the table, and somehow we all have to be driving around the 15 priorities. And now it's no, we need to know what each other are doing, and we need to know where we need to lean in and lean out. And we need to be in alignment in terms of the goals and cheering each other along the way. But here's our focus. And I feel like this is how we're actually going to be able to move the needle and to get things done. And it's a really exciting opportunity.
Okay, Commissioner Jean?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question in the earlier slide and also based off on the presentation that we received from Urban 3. Knowing that we have about 455 acres and the additional 105 acres of opportunity there. Have we done our own math to calculate about like maximizing it, and what would that produce for our tax base for Ramsey County? And also how much could we shift our property taxes off of residential to these sites instead?
Yeah, I'll come back to this.
Pat should be able to calculate that.
A lot.
That's okay.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I think, and this is not trying to evade the question directly, Commissioner Jean. I think what we learn is, not knowing exactly what's going to happen on each one of these sites sometimes can make it difficult to produce a realistic projection. But so that's part A of that answer. But part B is that I think as some of these sites begin to get closer, one, we advance their readiness, we have a better idea of what is going to go there and maybe generally when. I think there is an opportunity for us to actually do that analysis and get to numbers that feel more real than like super hypothetical. And so why I appreciate the efforts of our assessor's office. They have a really incredible data staff, by the way, where they at least began to examine like this hypothetical scenario, which is what if we just looked at similar things, right? This state office building is an office building, but it's got a state name on it, And when we look at that, how much value sits there as just an example. And so we can come back to you with maybe a little bit more series of numbers, but I think once we do that, I think we could take the next step to evaluate what that means on like a property tax burden level. So that's maybe a next step that we could deploy. But I think for just to call out acreage, I think is just as important in this moment because as I showed on those prior slides, we don't have a lot of land comparatively to our partners in Hennepin County, Dakota, Anoka, etc. And so, we have a great opportunity in moving the needle on Rice Creek Commons, which is 427 acres. That's a big one. And we're making a big step already with Maplewood Properties South being off the list. I need to update my graphic already. And so I think we can, and I think we should as part of this next step to doing that.
Yeah, I would say it's equally important for us to have those numbers available as we are talking about it, to build both support and buy-in from our cities, from our residents, to provide a reason for why this is a strategy that we are going to focus and put resources into. So it's just really important for that I see as a next step. For the variables, may you expand or talk about that a little bit more too, and or also share some of those lessons as examples, because we talked about the Maplewood properties that just sold and closed, right, just yesterday. Congratulations. it was also very many years in the making. What are the lessons that we can, have we learned about that, about what are things that we are going to control for and get those sites ready for development?
To take this one. This is exciting because it was many years in the making. And there was it was a tough, like, I think for those that participate in those early virtual calls about the future use of the site, those are some tough conversations. And I think one lesson learned from that is that always fight for that compromise in the middle. What the community initially wanted was the lowest density residential, and what came about was an opportunity to also build townhomes. And I think the city, after amount of data and time and conversation, said, yeah, I think that that's going to be valuable for the community, creating opportunities for first-time home buyers in a really unique way. So to kind of always push, where can we find greater density? I mean, if there's anything you take away from the Urban 3 presentation, it's really try to maximize the land that's available to you. And we could have just thrown our hands up in the spirit of disposing of real estate and said, just build a big single family residential community, but we didn't do that. And I think as we look at these future opportunities, we'll just need to have that same amount of grit to really work with the city, depending on the tenor of the community, to really fight for greater density, because A, it's going to create more housing opportunities, but B, it's going to create greater tax base as well, which then reduces tax burden on our residents. So, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, or Madam Chair, it's always throws me off sometimes.
Me too.
Commissioner John, the one thing that I would add to what Carrie just said is, one of the variables in the case of the Maplewood site was that the zoning wasn't right to move to that next step. And so I think through partnerships and through intentionality, this is ways that we can move projects, move sites to an advanced state of readiness. That certainly then bears out when we have conversations. For example, we'll talk a little bit more about it this afternoon, a particular site at Frost and English in Maplewood. That site is zoned, is ready to go. What was not ready was necessarily where the county was in its own disposition decision. And so that, I think, is an example of where, when we're aligned with local communities and stakeholders, our cities, I think this is where we can maximize our outputs because things are ready. And so, that is an example. Other instances, it might be more tactile, things that, like, we have to move this intersection or position something else. And, there's examples where we've done this in one-offs, where we've been thinking about this, and maybe it happened because of the talents that are in the Ramsey County team to look past it. But I mean, for example, I remember, because I've been with the county for long enough, we had heard from the city of Shoreview around a site at 694 in Rice. There was a transportation need to enhance that intersection and that interchange. But the site that was immediately adjacent to that particular interchange improvement, his access was really, really difficult, and was probably going to be made more difficult if we used a kind of run-of-the-mill standard approach to access management and design of that interchange. And so I bring forth that example because it was through the concerted work with the city of Shoreview, with our partners at Little Canada and Vadnais, that whole area is now seeing a lot of investment, because we've thought about how we can work together to enhance viability of sites, bring new investments. And so, I think it's building off of that work, building off of those experiences, and leaning in at times. And as we look at other sites across the county, is where we're going to have success.
And then my last question is around our tools. Maybe speak a little bit more about the tools and or the projects that we're considering for, some of the county-owned sites.
Madam Chair,
back to the
Commissioner,
workshop.
if I could put a little bit of a bookmark in that one,
Yep.
and we'll come back to it. But I mean, what I will say is, I think just more broadly, when we think about the tools that are in front of us in a much different way than we were before, I think what we're going to do though, and what's going to be different, is that we're going to pull in all those learnings, bring in our learnings from different aspects of projects, whether it is on the public works side, whether it's on the CD side, or through our conversations with our city partners and community stakeholders, that I think we will be much better aligned to, again, get to the readiness question, to understanding what are the real barriers to this particular locations, moving forward, than where we've ever been, at least in my Ramsey County career.
And I'll just say, Commissioner, that, while we're anxiously awaiting 1:30 and the big reveal, I do think much of what we're talking about is a coalescing of strategies that you're familiar with, but it is the kind of the packaging and the consolidation of a coordinated and intentional strategy that is unique, if that makes sense. So it's, we've had kind of things happening at Rice Creek Commons or on some of these sites, and it's just kind of how do we sort of step into a moment of creating kind of a strategy that's fully comprehensive for everything that we think we can control and do using the levers that we have at our disposal. So you might hear a couple things that are like new tools potentially, or we call them levers, I think, in the presentation a little bit, but a lot of it is already so baked into the work that you've been familiar with. And I think this is my moment not to say, when Josh had those 4 plans built up, we're not starting from scratch. None of this, as I talked about the staffing, the tools, the EDA, the HRA, all that stuff needed to get there. But we also have these 4 plans. And I think the plans are where the values live. And the plan, you guys worked really hard on passing most of those plans with sort of criteria for prioritization, thinking through what matters to the county, how mobility and transit and jobs, like all those things are connected. And so I hope that helps you realize, like, while it's we're kind of opening a new chapter, it's really bringing together a whole bunch of work that's already happened for a long time. So would you fully agree? Yeah, agree. Yeah. So it's exciting to kind of give it a kind of a life of its own, instead of a lot of different disparate parts. Yeah. So.
Okay, Commissioner McGuire?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is really exciting. I really appreciate it. And my question, maybe you want to bookmark my question too. And if you're going to get to it this afternoon, it's on slide 9. It's the county's unique challenge, and it's about the areas of highest net tax capacity are also areas of considerable amount of tax exempt properties. I was just wondering if you could just go into a little more detail about those. You've listed 5 communities. Are they in ranked order of highest tax exempt or highest tax capacity? I just wanted a little more clarity on that slide and what we're looking at there, what we're going to do about that. And if it's coming this afternoon, I can wait.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioner McGuire. Those are, as we went through an exercise of kind of slicing a little bit of the county just to kind of explore where those areas of growth and opportunity and strength might exist. Yeah, these are the 5 areas of current tax base. Again, this is kind of combining both geographies of cities as well as geographies of neighborhoods in the case of city of St. Paul. I think what I wanted to demonstrate was not to suggest, we're going to be in Roseville because it's number 1 or Maplewood number 2. I think it was just to articulate yet another dimension of, if we hypothetically added tax exempt into this scenario, we would see downtown actually right in the mix of its top 5, as well as, areas where we already see, areas of high tax capacity in the case of Maplewood, who I would point out are asking us and have asked us county staff, what are you doing about all the county owned land you have in our community? And so this just points to, it's also in some of our areas of strength. where we can do more, and we can be intentional. And oh, by the way, we have a little bit of nudging that is happening from, some of our partners. But I think this also I wanted to leave you also just to reflect that it exists across the board. This is a Ramsey County thing. It's may be part of Ramsey County's brand at the moment, that we have so much of it. But if we can learn, bring in those learnings from different projects, different sites, different areas, we can begin to find successes in all corners of the county.
And I appreciate that, Madam Chair. If I could just follow up, that's great. And I can also get more information offline too. But just as an example, Roseville, I know they're high net tax capacity. I didn't think about us being so high in tax exempt. Is that because we're putting in colleges and universities? I'm trying to think why Roseville's a high tax exempt status. But maybe I can take that off. I mean,
Commissioner, I mean, I think when we did this high level number, and again, in this hypothetical scenario, Roseville, 9% of their city is in that tax exempt. Obviously, Maplewood, we spoke to 16.
Yeah.
Shoreview is 7%. Highland in St. Paul is 15%, largely driven by the universities located within that neighborhood. And White Bear Lake is 12%. So just to give you a snapshot, I mean, even within, I should have probably done that right from the get-go, is just layer in those numbers. But that is examples where a lot kind of sits inside of, across the county, across our communities.
That helps. That helps a lot, that context. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Commissioner Jevonsing and then Commissioner Moran.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One builds off of, I think, County Manager Becker had talked about how we can use these foundational plans that we have and really put them into motion. I think that through COVID and then through Operation Metro Surge, we realized just how dynamic the things are changing in real time and the fluidity of the needs of our community. We don't want to be in process paralysis. We're always stopping and analyzing without actually moving and doing.
Right.
At the same time, what are ways that we as a county can continue to have ongoing conversations with community members, with our partners, with our business community, so that we're having this continuous feedback loop as to what are the changing needs and how can we meet them, so that by the time we're ready to act, we're meeting in concordance with all of those different factors.
That's a great question. Madam Chair, Commissioners, I think we have this unique opportunity right now under the intergenerational wealth and economic justice strategic priority to build out what is our next iteration of the ECI plan. And you'll recall that the first plan was built in it was during the height of the COVID era. And this concept of meeting the moment in terms of the small business challenges at that time was really central and integral to the plan. I think now we're seeing yet another business disturbance, we'll say, that is going to really double down on our need to be in flexible conversation with the business community. But how do we leverage our small business support organizations so that it's not always the county coming to them, especially during a climate where government may be additionally feared. And so then supporting and growing capacity within those small business support organizations to say, what are you hearing? The Business Resource Collective being like really fundamental to providing feedback. They were the first go around with the ECI plan. I think the second version of the ECI plan will need to map out what is that ecosystem even more so that we can continue to weather, what may be the next, disruption, if you will. But really finding opportunities to gather feedback in a way that is not imposing or not creating engagement fatigue, but to say this is the time, and space where we have these conversations and do so in a way that honors maybe what the business community is going through. And so
Well, and then as a follow-up to that, I think one of the things I already see some of this happening when we look at our civic partners. I just want to call out that we had a kind of a touch base meeting with our colleagues at the city of Mounds View, looking at, how do we align the future vision of that community with other public facilities and what the community is going to need in the future, and whether that's school districts, libraries, municipal community centers, things like that, as a both and, to make sure that we're meeting the service needs of a community in a way that's easily accessible, but also that maximizes the taxable properties there, and also make sure to leverage our public dollars in very expensive capital investments, right? So I just appreciate that. And so one of the questions I have is how that I appreciate when we look at trying to pull some of the properties that we have out of a tax exempt status in our downtown St. Paul area, because that's so tax capacity, high tax capacity potential. But also the ability of co-locating or distributing some services, however we are going to imagine that for the future throughout the county, to meet communities throughout the county, not just always meeting those needs in downtown St. Paul. So I just want to kind of put that into the imagining space. And then the other piece to that is building off of our conversation this morning. I also think about very strategic conversations with some of our biggest business partners. And I'm thinking like in my district, Land O'Lakes and some of the other kind of folks. I think about in my district a few years ago when we lost Deluxe to downtown Minneapolis, the idea of how are we ensuring that our current business anchors are aware of a potential growth within our upcoming land opportunities, in the same way that we're developing those conversations with our municipal partners with the civic opportunities.
I'd love to. So, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, or Madam Chair, I think you've touched on really what was the initial intention of Ramsey County Means Business, and that was to feature redevelopment opportunities across Ramsey County on behalf of our city partners who may not have the budget or the team dedicated to that type of kind of marketing effort, if you will. So each city got its profile, and I think we need to breathe a lot of life into that, and we need to use this as an opportunity, a launch pad to revisit that on behalf of our city partners, because I do think where our city partners do this really well is around BRNE efforts, business retention and expansion efforts. They do business surveys, they do business focus groups, and we don't necessarily want to duplicate or replicate that, but we do want to, like, what are you hearing when they have those site visits? But where we can be particularly instrumental is saying, hey, there's a redevelopment opportunity over here. Here are the tools and the incentives attached to that, whether it be at the city or the county, to take away, what was kind of touched on this morning, but Ramsey County is fully built out. And yet we have redevelopment tools and we have environmental response funds. And so it's not something that should be feared. It may add some degree of complexity, but it also adds tools available to mitigate the complexity. And that's where the site and that effort can be particularly helpful.
That's great. And then just one last question on this is, and this you can hold for a future discussion perhaps this afternoon, but is, when I think about those spaces that are not fully developed, particularly Rice Creek Commons, and thinking about a question I often get in community, so this is for a future answer, unless you want to give a tidbit now, is what can the county be doing to get out of our own way and to make sure that we are moving to a state of readiness, as Josh said earlier in the conversation. And I know a lot of those things that are happening behind the scenes, and we try to be very transparent in our JDA discussions. But I think of how are we making sure, one, that we are putting ourselves in that state of readiness, and how we're communicating that to future development partners.
Because that's a great question.
Yeah, for future discussion.
I will just say one more thing about what Carrie's saying around the cities. I mean, there's informal and more formal ways of doing that, like the BRNE, like getting those updates. That's a very formal way. But you all have relationships with your elected officials. I've been trying to strengthen that with administrators. Again, Josh and Carrie have done so much in the last few years to get us ready. The CED summits are a regular part of business now in Ramsey County. Like we have, like, so there's just a real opportunity where we're not just, it's like a one-off. I mean, we have layers of relationships. And both Carrie and I have worked in the Northeast Metro. I mean, just yesterday we were kind of shooting back some emails with City of Shoreview. I mean, we know though, most of those cities, we don't, with 19, we can actually really know them pretty well, which is a little harder over in Hennepin County with 47 or wherever they've got, So I think it's an advantage. I mean, we are looking at these things as, how is it our competitive advantage? Because of relationships. I will say all the work that we're gonna be talking about this afternoon, we're gonna have to leverage all of those relationships to do the work, so.
Well, and I appreciate that. I did a follow-up just yesterday with the Mounds View mayor and the city manager, just to have, again, that, okay, as a follow-up, what are the thoughts that we had from that meeting and how do we keep this conversation moving forward? So I appreciate that reminder of how we can be helpful in creating that connective tissue as well.
Yeah, and for you all in the city of St. Paul, it's through the city council. Many of you have super close relationships with the city council. I mean, I think it's great, so thank you.
Commissioner Moran, or did you?
Yeah, one last thing I just wanted to mention, and I think it probably helps to kind of summarize this one piece on what Commissioner Jevon Singh was asking about, our responsiveness and our ability to adapt given that things are changing. Our economic competitiveness inclusion plan that was approved in 2020 spelled out a number of actions in that business arena and area that we just have not been able to get to because we didn't have the tools. And so we've been advocating and we've now been successful at getting those. But I think what was compelling, or at least I'm going to believe that was compelling to the city councils that we visited, was that we spoke to the interdependencies between housing and redevelopment and business and workforce as all united levers to move not just us out of a place of crisis around housing, but to elevate wages, to build and foster new job opportunities as a ways to kind of tackle this and get to the kind of the global vision that we had related to this plan around our competitiveness and our inclusive economy. And so I just want to mention that is I think only to say, Commissioner Jevon Singh, we recognize things are evolving and we need to adapt. I would say we've been pretty good at moving our programming and trying to be that way. I think there's always opportunity for us to get out of our own way at times. But also that I think we still have work that's in front of us that we've said is really important. I don't think anybody else is jumping into that space to tackle it because it's challenging. To some extent, our city partners have been doing it with limited abilities. As we move to a future state here, we actually will have more tools. We will potentially have more funding that we can really move, to say what I said earlier, move big needles forward. So thank you.
Commissioner Moran?
So this is a good meeting. I like the idea of focusing on the opportunities that we have for versus the challenges. And of course, it's always how do we move forward to get to where we want to go. And that's one is to increase a greater income base, so that we're not just relying on property taxes. And so, for me, it's kind of like thinking about the meeting we had this morning in the board meeting, because in reality, we know what we want. We've had enough experience, we've done enough work revisioning. We have the language. We are the best one to lead in conversations about what we need and use the language that we know is going to move us in the direction we need to go. We have led, we are leading, we bring others aboard, right? We have, good relationships, pretty decent. What you think, Ortega, around the Downtown Alliance? We're continue to build our relationship with St. Paul. We have to take with Eagle Lab. I heard Centurion. We're building in Shoreview and Maplewood and other locations. So we have good relationships. And I just state all of that because I struggled this morning with Greater MSP. being a messenger of our message or fighting in this big coalition where a lot of them places we have good, strong relationships ourselves. And we
Yeah.
dictates our, not only the message, but the direction that we need to go and bring other partners into that. We're leveraging those partnerships. We're thinking strategically. And sometimes we have to lean in and sometimes lean out. Some things we don't have to lean into everything.
Right.
That other people are setting the table for us to be a part of. And so I mention and say that because I believe Ramsey County is the best messenger of the message. We're all got good, strong relationships in the areas and the districts that we represent. And so we have a role to play to leverage those partnerships to get us to where we need to go. And not just also just depend on the staff to do that, right? But together and collectively, we can build the momentum. We can bring in and have the strategic and layers of relationship that's needed to move us forward. And I think, we're at a good place with a good board at this moment to really do this work in a way that's going to look at, we can either look at all the tax exempt places and say, darn it, but we're working on that too, right? We're working on that too. Or we can say, what power, what leverage do we have in Ramsey County with what we have and begin to build on that in a way that is going to move us forward. And so for me, and just looking at all the good, rich, the conversations we've been having, is that how do we move some people out the way? Right? That gets in the way, and leverage the good, strong partnership we have to get to where we need to be. And partnership and relationship with others, because none of us can do this and do this work by ourselves. And so, whatever's coming this afternoon, I look forward to that, some of this stuff. I think that's gonna move us forward.
Okay,
Just to this point,
yep, so just go
I
ahead
just
to this
wanna
point, yep.
re-emphasize what Reno was just stated. This morning I kept quiet on purpose. You guys did a fantastic job with MSB. I mean, I've known Peter since he's had that job. And he was uncomfortable, which was a good thing. And he heard it from you guys because I'm tired of talking to him and it doesn't mean anything anymore. That was the last year we cut his thing in half, the allocation in half. He came to me and I told him I recommended to cut it in half. And I think before that we cut it even, so, and that is to send you a message because you're not listening to us. Well, evidently it doesn't make a difference, right? But now I think he comes here and he sees, I got 7 people that are really not happy. And I think that's a great message. So I just want to reinforce that because I think at this point, we need to do things. If we're gonna wait for every partner, we're gonna be waiting a long time.
Commissioner Zhang and then Jevon Singh, and then we're gonna.
I'm gonna end up by saying this, that we have strong partners and we don't pay them to be our partners. And I just don't understand why we're paying them.
Yeah. We'll discuss that at another time.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Commissioner Zhang, Jevon Singh, and then we're gonna close out.
One important piece in our messaging and the communications about this too is, the direct impact or experience that our residents will have as well. And what I was frustrated about from earlier, this presentation earlier and connecting with what Commissioner Moran is talking about is, we should again tie it in with, the direction that our board has set to about building intergenerational wealth into our communities. And that economic development here is directly tied to benefiting residents. And I'm glad that Director O'Neill is here from Workforce in here as well, because I would actually like for us to follow the whole continuum of projects of creating actual jobs or whatnot, and how that benefits residents or how residents can even access those job opportunities. So an example that we had is the Rice Creek Commons and the groundbreaking of the industrial site there. I'm not sure if it's open or whatnot yet, but if and when it is, it's like, can we connect it directly to our services for residents? That these are the job opportunities that are available to them.
Yeah, and I would just like to say that, you know, regardless of the conversation that we had, or in spite of, or because of the conversation we had this morning with Greater MSP, in no way do I now want to say, you know, the conversation of the conversation around, corporate versus community and other different cultures and small business. These should not be antagonistic. These are our partners, and having strong relationships within kind of our larger corporations throughout our community. A lot of them share our values. A lot of them are standing with us, are having conversations with us that want to progress a healthy, thriving community. And so that there are ways for us to foster those relationships, to welcome those people in, encourage them to expand their footprint here and to work with us. Just because one particular partner didn't seem to be representing those relationships in the way that we felt comfortable with does not mean that we don't have those. We want to continue to open our doors and work with the folks who really want to make our community strong.
Okay, so thank you to our presenters and staff for walking us through today's discussion on driving economic growth and strengthening Ramsey County's tax base. We heard about significant property tax pressures that the county faces, including a limited tax base, a high percentage of tax exempt property, and growing cost pressures from federal and state mandates. We are also discussed how Ramsey County is uniquely positioned, despite being the smallest county in the metro by land area, but to leverage redevelopment opportunities and partnerships to grow our tax base. So we also heard about the tools that the county has available, from infrastructure investments to economic development strategy and housing redevelopment efforts to catalyze growth across the county, from downtown St. Paul to communities like Maplewood, Shoreview and White Bear Lake. Not that I'm from Maplewood, but today's workshop helps set the stage for continued strategic conversations about how Ramsey County can strengthen its fiscal health while supporting long-term economic vitality. Thank you guys for staying over, and we'll see you this afternoon. We're done, adjourned. Enjoy your lunch.